The last opinion video I made about skill trees was over a year ago. Since then, we've gotten trees for Wolfgang, Wormwood, Willow, Wigfrid, Winona, and Wirt. And while I do have opinions on how those turned out, I didn't feel the need to make a video explaining them. And that's because I didn't really care all that much. Those characters were either strong enough that they didn't need a skill tree, or at the very least they weren't in a state where using their unique abilities made everything more difficult or tedious. I was invested in Woody's skill tree because, in 9 out of 10 situations, using his unique wear forms was just worse than playing the game as a Wilson clone. His wear forms were such a unique twist on gameplay that I and many others who I talk with understood that Woody's basic character concept was a winner that just needed a bit of tweaking. And Clay did that. The changes they made were in almost all the right directions, which resulted with, in my opinion, easily the best skill tree we've seen out of all the characters so far. I bring this up because Walter is in sort of the same position. Just like Woody, all his main perks are overshadowed by what's already available in the game. Beefalo are just objectively better mounts than Wobby. In 9 out of 10 situations, fighting like a Wilson clone on foot is way stronger, cheaper, and funner than using even the strongest slingshot ammo. And items like the Bee Queen crown or Void Robe make Walter's no fear mechanic almost completely redundant. The only thing Walter really brings to the table is his portable tent, which, to be honest, is actually quite good, especially if you're playing with others, but still, a character isn't in a good spot when 90% of their skills either aren't fun to use or aren't worth using. With that said, how good is Walter's skill tree? Well, let's take a look at the skills to see what he's gotten so far. Walter got a bunch of new rounds that he can fire from his slingshot. 2 of them grant Walter the ability to do AoE damage. The one everybody will probably be using is the Moonglass rounds, which deal 51 direct damage and 34 splash. The other AoE round uses Stingers, and deals half the damage, at 25 direct and 17 splash. The Stinger rounds are obviously going to be easier to obtain in mass, since you can use them to kill a ton of bees, and just snowball stacks of Stingers, but you can obtain Moonglass very early from the Lunar Grotto, fairly early if you rush Lunar Island, and you'll have stacks of it once you beat the Celestial Champion. You're also not going to be fighting swarms so often in the early game, and possibly even mid game, that you'd run out of glass rounds. Next we go on to the 3 rounds that deal direct damage. Shock Scrap rounds do electric damage, so against dry targets they hit for 42, while against wet, it'll deal 70. Despite visually creating an explosion, Gunpowder rounds don't do AoE damage, and instead will hit a single target for 68. Dreadstone rounds require Dreadstone, and does both normal and planar damage, totaling 59.5 against a regular target. There's nothing really to say about these, they're basically just gold or marble rounds with modified numbers. The last 2 bullets that work in the beta are Sticky and Ichor rounds. Both significantly reduce the movement speed of whatever it hits, with Sticky rounds lasting for about 7 seconds, while Ichor rounds last for an insane 3 minutes. This makes sense considering Sticky rounds use inexpensive honey, while Ichor rounds require an entire Ichor jar, which is something you only get after beating Fuel Weaver. Sticky rounds also don't work on flying targets, while Ichor rounds do. Also, both rounds leave a trail of goo, which will slow you or whatever mob walks into it. Other than that, we have the Bright Shade, Pure Horror, and Pure Brilliance rounds that have yet to be implemented. With that, we've covered 1/3 of Walter's entire skill tree. There are also 2 skills that increase the number of pellets Walter gets when he crafts ammo that you can include in his ammo skills. The next group of skills all have to do with upgrading his slingshot. The Slingshot Smith on its own is completely useless, as its sole purpose is to let you use the slingshot mods that it branches off into. Flailing Band increases firing distance, which effectively increases your DPS, since the further away you can fire, the longer it takes the mob to get to you, which in turn means you'll be able to fire off more shots before being forced to run away. Sticky Handle makes it so that the slingshot won't slip out of Walter's hands when his wetness is really high. You should never be at high wetness unless you're someone like Wirt, so it's useless in 99% of the situations you'll be in, and is really there just to make the skill it leads to more expensive. The Void Grip increases the slingshot's rate of fire. This is obviously a must-have since it's a straight-up DPS increase. Next we have the 2 frame mods. The Tillicite Crown lets you hold 2 different ammo, and supposedly will fire some alternate ammo type as a special attack. Even without the special ammo, I like the idea of being able to aim and fire the slingshot manually, and quickly using an alternate ammo type for different effects. Lastly, the Scrappy Frame lets you charge the rounds, which also doubles their damage. So forget 1/3, the vast majority of Walter's skill tree is dedicated to his slingshot. What's left are Wobby skills, and we're going to blow through these very quickly because I don't find them particularly interesting. Wobby Training Station lets you unlock the basic version of all the skills that are listed. Instead of getting all the Wobby skills right off the bat, you have to earn badges by training Wobby first. The Agility skill increases Wobby's speed. I'm sure Clay is going to adjust the exact number, but for now, Ameslarii did a video comparing it to Beefalo, so check that one out if you're interested. The conclusion was that Wobby is faster than every Beefalo except Ryder, which means you should still have an incentive to tame a Beefalo, since almost the entire reason for using them is speed. Bravery Training increases the amount of damage you can take before getting bucked off by Wobby. It's still worse than the Beefalo, since you can get hit until the Beefalo dies. This skill is especially bad, since getting bucked off of Wobby is a downside of using him. Good game design forces players to come up with creative solutions to a downside, not diminish it with a click of a button. Support Training decreases the amount of sanity loss Walter takes when getting hit on Wobby. It's another bad skill that decreases a downside with the click of a button, a downside that is almost non-existent if Walter decides to use a Beefalo. Digging training lets Wobby acquire random items from time to time. That's it. Pets training lets Wobby assist Walter in picking up items. This is the one skill that I actually think isn't all that bad. Okay, so we've gone through all the skills Walter currently has. Most of them revolve around long-range combat using the Slingshot, and the rest make Wobby better. So is Walter's skill tree good? The answer is no, it's actually really bad. The problem with Walter's skill tree as it currently stands is that most of the abilities revolve around making the Slingshot Walter's primary damage source. Just look at the rounds Clay added. We now have 3 different types of ammo that decrease enemy movement speed, one of which lasts almost half a game day per shot. Couple that with a faster firing rate, long range damage, increased damage from charge shots, skills that increase ammo production, and stronger ammo type, and it's clear Clay wants you to play Walter as a character who primarily fights with his Slingshot. There's only one issue. Long range combat in DST is boring. Since typical enemies don't have long range attacks, 95% of all encounters are going to be Walter standing still holding F while he waits for the enemy to get to him, and then running away to make more distance once the enemy gets close. That's essentially it. That is not fun. It doesn't matter if you make it easier by letting Walter substantially decrease enemy speed. In DST, ranged combat is just very boring. Since you can't move, you auto-aim, and like I said, 95% of the time your enemy is just running at you. Not only that, but because ranged combat is so free of risk, Clay decided to make it inferior DPS-wise to melee combat for balancing purposes. So you're wasting more time outside of fights making ammo, wasting more time inside of fights doing less DPS, and not having fun because the combat is repetitive and risk-averse. You have to endure all that just so you can say that you're playing the game differently. Unfortunately, something being different doesn't mean fun. The reason ranged combat was historically fun in DST was because it was seen as more of an expensive but effective luxury rather than a primary way of killing things. Blow darts used to be the only viable long-range damage option for players. What made blow darts so fun was that they were extremely expensive and they massively out-DPS melee options. Each blow dart costs 1 Azure Feather, 1 Hound's Tooth, and 2 Reeds. Hounds aren't even guaranteed to drop a tooth. Azure Feathers are only available during winter, and birds aren't guaranteed to drop them either. And reeds are much less available than things like twigs and grass. Therefore, using blow darts as your primary weapon was out of the question because it takes so much time and effort to amass them. However, if you happen to undergo that investment, then you are rewarded with a weapon that deals 100 damage per hit, hits just as quickly as melee, and you don't even have to put yourself at risk to use it. The actual long-range combat of blow darts isn't fun. The fun part is seeing your grinding pay off by letting you destroy something with almost no difficulty. If you tried to make blow darts a primary weapon by decreasing its cost and decreasing its DPS, people would find it boring because the build-up and payoff isn't there. The novelty of fighting something without difficulty will eventually wear off, which leaves you with the stale playstyle of holding F while your target slowly walks towards you every single time. The other problem with Walter's skill tree is that Beefalo are still just better than Wobby. They overshadow half of Wobby's skills, while things like the dig ability are useful but boring. It might be useful to get a free random item by clicking a button, but that's not fun. It's not engaging, there is no decision making on behalf of the player, it's a mindless perk that honestly cheapens the gaming experience. So that's what I think is a problem with Walter's skill tree. If this were released tomorrow, you'd have a ton of people play Walter for a few hours until the novelty of his different range combat wears off. Unlike other characters like Woody, who bring a unique playstyle that is also fun and engaging, Walter is unique but boring and unengaging. So how should Clay fix this? To be honest, I think the first thing they need to do is just give up on trying to make range combat interesting for the reasons I have already given. As long as 95% of encounters amount to just holding F while keeping your distance, then it doesn't matter what tweaks Clay makes. Ranged combat is just not going to be fun. Instead of that, I think Clay should view the Slingshot as more of a support weapon. Instead of the Slingshot being the primary damage dealer, its main purpose should be a tool that Walter can quickly switch to in order to apply an effect to the target in the middle of combat. So if Walter was fighting a fast opponent like the Ancient Guardian, he would fight it normally while quickly swapping to the Slingshot in order to apply, say, the slowdown effect to it. If Walter is fighting Fueweaver, he would quickly switch to the Slingshot and launch glass rounds to deal with the Woven Shadows, and then switch back to melee for the actual boss. This is the kind of playstyle Clay should envision for Walter. It's both different and engaging. In fact, even more engaging than fighting as Wilson, because you now have to juggle your Slingshot, the type of ammo, and how long the effects last for on top of regular combat. Because this is the type of combat Walter should be designed around, I think the new types of ammo should also be changed. Instead of stingers doing AoE damage, I think they should make these a lot more expensive, but also make the effect damage over time. For example, one round does 300 damage over the course of 20 seconds. For gunpowder rounds, I'd add the ability to destroy trees and boulders. This means you'd have to be more mindful of using them in a forest, and they could be used to counter specific enemies like poison burst nuts or toadstool. For dreadstone rounds, I'd probably just double the damage and give it the ability to destroy hard substances. I'd replace shock scrap rounds with water balloon rounds that have the effect of applying wetness to any mob in the game. This would allow Walter to make situational weapons like the Morningstar his primary, and let him synergize well with characters like Warley and Wigfrid. Moonglass rounds are good as they are, so are sticky rounds. However, when it comes to Ichor, I would probably cut the time of the effect down to 30 seconds and give it a planar damage over time effect as well. In addition to these changes, I think Clay should add a bunch of other ammo types that correspond to minerals. That means ammo for red, green, orange, yellow, and yes, even iridescent gems. Green gems could boost the item drop rate for whatever it hits. Yellow could make the target emit light and sanity just like a dwarf star. I'm not sure about orange, but maybe it could aggro all nearby mobs onto the target. Red could do triple damage to a burning target, or just cause the target to give off heat until it dies. Walter should also have some kind of piercing ammo that, when manually aimed, damages every mob that it passes through. The possibilities of these different types of ammo and various effects that they have are what I think would make Walter interesting, not his ability to outrange things. He definitely should have range combat as an option, but it shouldn't be his primary. Finally, Walter should have what I like to call the Warley factor. As you know, Warley is able to achieve the highest damage multiplier in the game under specific conditions. I would like the same kind of thing for Walter except with ammo. It would have to be very expensive. Clay should definitely give Walter some sort of ammo that lets him do Wolfgang or Warley DPS if all the conditions are right. Maybe the ammo would use up iridescent gems or enlightening crown shards, but whatever it is, it would be great for Walter to have some sort of Warley factor where he could just destroy everything after grinding and getting the stars to align. Those are the types of ammo that I'd like to see. Now for the Slingshot itself, I think the upgrades that Clay gave it are good. Faster firing speed, different types of ammo, and more range are all welcome upgrades. However, I would make one change to it, which is that I would greatly reduce the firing animation for the first shot. Even if you have the firing speed upgrade, if you try to shoot something, the first shot takes an extraordinary amount of time to fire. As a support tool, the opposite should happen. Whether it be a skill or a base change to the Slingshot, you should be able to swap to it, quickly fire off the round, and swap back to melee. Making the first shot extra slow does nothing but encourage the boring playstyle of holding F while the enemy walks to you. If Clay doesn't like the idea because players can abuse this mechanic by animation cancelling, then I'd suggest putting a cooldown on this ability. Anyway, that's how I changed the Slingshot from a boring, unengaging weapon where 99% of all your gameplay will be holding F while waiting for the target to get close, to a fun support weapon which encourages innovation in regards to what ammo to use for what situation, and skill in quickly swapping to it in order to keep debuffs on the target. If you really want to just hold F and keep your distance, you can still do it. It just won't be the primary focus of the skills and new ammo types. Now onto Wobby. Unless Clay nerfs Beefalo into the ground, I don't see how giving Wobby a speed boost or letting Walter take more hits before being bucked off is going to be at all impactful. I also don't like the skill that just gives you stuff for free because you click the button, so I'd probably scrap the entire Wobby tree and implement the following. I would give Wobby skills that let him swim. Right now, the only alternative to sea exploration by boats is really Woody's Weregoose form. Letting Walter explore the ocean on a fast, maneuverable mount like Wobby would make exploring the ocean so much more fun than using the slow, clunky boats, and would allow Walter to fill quite a big niche that Beefalo taming cannot. It would also let Walter do ocean combat completely differently, giving rise to many unique strategies for different enemies, like for example Crab King. The ability to swim would not come without risks, as Wobby becoming small or getting attacked while in the water could mean instant drowning. This skill can be further balanced by having Wobby's hunger drain faster while swimming or requiring a special saddle for Wobby. I honestly think that this skill alone would make Wobby's tree interesting enough, as it would allow players to experience the ocean content, which comprises half the surface world, in a way that is completely unique and, more importantly, way more fun than the traditional use of slow and hard to maneuver boats. I had some other ideas for Wobby's tree, like scouting skills that would let him go off on his own for a bit to clear up the fog of war for you, or a rideshare skill that lets other players catch a ride or even use Wobby if Walter gives them permission, but I think that making Wobby an ocean mount is more than enough to make investing in his skills worth it. So that concludes my suggestion for Clay on how to greatly improve Walter's skill tree. While I believe in my vision for Walter, I understand that it's ultimately my opinion, and that many times what sounds good in theory doesn't end up working in practice. However, I've given this a lot of thought, and I'm convinced that if Clay makes these changes, Walter's skill tree will be looked back on as one of the best. So as you may have guessed, I finished the main parts of this video after the latest update came out. The changes do not at all impact the main arguments I make in the video, since Clay still clearly wants you to use the Slingshot as your primary, and Wobby's skill tree is unchanged. However, I'd say the changes they've introduced are overall a big positive. The best inclusions has got to be the alternate fire for the to-the-side frame. Trying to group up enemies while aiming and timing your shots is much more engaging than just holding F. Not only that, but most of the magical rounds aren't just straight damage. They're all about applying special effects to the target, which is what a support tool should do. Clay also implemented the Pure Horror, Bright Shade, and Pure Brilliance rounds. The Pure Horror does 37 damage on contact, and then deals 10 damage hits 4 times for a total of 77 damage. Considering Curse rounds deal an average of 85 damage per hit, I think the Pure Horror rounds damage over time should be extended a lot more, since they are a much more expensive craft. Bright Shade rounds deal 68 damage per hit, with a chance of spawning a Vine that deals 85. The Vine doesn't spawn nearly as often as Shadow Tentacles when cursed rounds are used, so I'm going to guess the chance is about 20%. If I'm right, then they're statistically as strong as cursed rounds, unless you're going up against planar mobs. Since they are meant as a straightforward damage option, I think they might be okay as they are. Finally, Pure Brilliance rounds do 54 direct damage and apply an effect to the target that makes them take an additional 5 planar damage on hit. The effect lasts for 8 seconds, which means if you're hitting an enemy non-stop, one round can easily deal over 100 damage. I like it, but I think they should prolong the effect a little, perhaps from 8 seconds to 10. Interestingly, it sort of pairs well with Pure Horror rounds, since the Pure Horror rounds do 5 hits per shot. However, I think it works best with things that hit quickly like the Bright Shade Staff, Beam Mines, Mosquitoes, or my personal favorite, huge stacks of West Balloons. Anyway, that's my review of the things that I didn't cover in the main video. Like I said, they are all good additions, but they don't really address the main problem of Walter's Slingshot, which is that range combat is too boring for it to be considered a primary weapon. If you agree, disagree, or want to expand on these ideas, please leave your feedback in the comment section. Thanks for watching, take care, and have a great day.